Hi everyone, welcome to Life Edge, because life just doesn't have to be mediocre. I'm Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Dr. Susan Nash. Hi Susan, how are you?
I'm a survivor.
You're a survivor?
I just finished 3 days of a conference that we converted to 100% online.
Oh gosh.
And I was in meetings online for like around 8 to 10 hours a day.
Oh,
and
lucky
what
you.
I found is we needed somebody like Cindy with us, our guest.
Well, our guest today is Cindy Skalicky, and here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation. Digital learning development, media development, corporate video, management consulting, and more. Visit us at www.relate.com. Thanks. And joining us in that center position of power, we call it power, it's Cindy Skalicky. And Susan, would you like to do the honors?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm so happy to introduce you to Cindy Skalicky of On Point Communications. So welcome, Cindy. How did you get interested in communications?
Oh, communications has been near and dear to my heart for really as long as I can remember. I am all about messaging, and my desire started early on as anytime I would be watching a message or hearing someone speak, from a stage, I was always just naturally thinking to myself, was that done well, or where was there some room to improve? And so it turned into a real passion for me, especially as I entered my undergraduate and graduate degrees and some of my positions early on in global advertising and PR. But I'm always just totally keyed into how people present themselves, their brands, their messages, and I'm analyzing it. How did that do? How did that message land? How did that person present? Did they nail it, or is there some room to improve? That's
actually a lot of fun.
It is fun.
It is fun. Yeah, I remember when I first started out in the industry, and I was actually in the computer industry first, but I had to give a lot of talks, and I was the typical very shy when I was growing up, and getting me in front of public was like, ugh. So I started watching people. I just started watching every public speaker I could find, and just, okay, that's how they did that. All right, that was good. And what about, oh yeah, okay. Oh, bad. That was not very good. And the same kind of idea of watching, and then you try to kind of imitate. And then, as I think, you can probably verify this is what you do, but when you start speaking, you develop your own style of what works with your audience. How do you work with an audience? And then you can, and most people tend to criticize themselves. Yeah, how well did I do? How did I do? Did I do badly? Oh, that was a good point. Didn't do well here. And the more you do it, the more relaxed you are. And but after a while, you just do it. And I think a lot of the fear goes away, and everything else goes away. Do you find that that's the case when do you train people to present that?
Absolutely, yes.
You do.
Well, I want to hit on what you just said, Rick, because you hit the nail right on the head. There's so much learning potential just from watching other people.
Mm-hmm.
To put that concept on the front burner, like, I'm going to watch this person speak, but I'm also going to take notes about how they could help me become a better speaker. That's a huge way for audience members, no matter where you are or what you're doing, to learn to be better themselves. And then you're right, practice is going to make you better. And one of the things I run into so often with my clients is that, they think that what's in their head about what they want to say is going to come out just like that when they open their mouths. And it just doesn't work that way. You really do have to practice and feel the flow of the sentences and words, and make sure that story that's in your head is coming out exactly how you want it to. And there's no other way around it than to rehearse it. So yes, I train corporate teams or entrepreneurs or really anyone who is getting up for any kind of oratory I will train them. I've even coached someone on a eulogy, if you can believe that.
Interesting.
And they came to me. He was actually a stranger who had come into one of my workshops, and his brother had died tragically, and he needed to memorialize his brother in a really special way. He had one chance to do it, and it was a privilege to work with him.
I can imagine training someone. Part it'll be a bad joke, but I can just say, you know, the eulogy was just kind of dead. It didn't come across right. It just,
You're terrible.
Well,
I couldn't resist.
The irony
Sorry.
of the eulogy as a type of oratory is that it is the most important speech you might ever give for a person who cannot hear it, unfortunately. But it is such a, it weighs heavily on people, and I've often been places where there isn't one.
And I don't know how people do it, that they don't cry in the middle of it. Sometimes they do, but boy, that's a tough one, especially if it's somebody you really cared about or know very well. It's like, that's the hardest part, I think, of a eulogy. Yeah. I imagine that's an art in and of itself.
It really is. It's a totally different type of speech, and it's meant to honor and bring up the audience who's very sad and grieving, and it's a totally different style of speaking, and it's heavily weighted on storytelling, personal experience, and some motivation as far as how you can remember that person and you in a very sad time.
Let me ask you, see if you saw this one or remember, but have you seen a eulogy that touched you before? One that maybe an entertainment person or somebody, and you went, oh, that was touching. Can you think of one?
Yes, George Bush, when he eulogized his father. It was really touching. And I actually wrote an analysis of his eulogy and applauded how he went about that. He became emotional, which is completely called for in a situation like that. And he told some really beautiful stories, and he just very artfully stitched together a message that addressed both family and nation.
That's good. That's good.
And
Susan, can you think of one?
Sorry to jump in.
Oh, you're good.
Can you think of a eulogy that got to you?
I don't want to step on anybody, but I think that one of the things that made George Bush and makes George W. Bush effective is that his sense of authenticity. I saw him speak last year at an event in Houston. He was there with Laura, and I mean, I'm not necessarily a fan of any politician, but I was really struck by the fact that he comes across as very authentic.
That is the core of good public speaking, is authenticity. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And the other thing that comes to mind, and I don't know what you think about this, Rick, that, changing gears, I just listened to technical speeches or talks for 3 days, and they range from really, really great to very much overemphasis on logos rather than ethos or pathos. And so I just thought, I think that's one of the things that people forget. And I thought maybe you could talk about the pillars of rhetoric, at least Aristotelian, to see how to be more effective. Yes, absolutely. So for those watching who may be unfamiliar with Aristotelian rhetoric, Aristotle's shape that he teaches from is an equilateral triangle, and he talks about the 3 pillars of effective communication, and they are, as you said, Susan, ethos, logos, and pathos, which translates into ethos is credibility, that's S for speaker, the person delivering the speech. Logos is message, and that's kind of what you're trying to communicate. It's the logical flow of the message. And then there is the pathos piece, which is audience, and you want to get at heart, and you want to get at an emotional tug. So the speaker has to balance head and heart, and it's very important that you don't forget one of those and that you have thought thoroughly through them before you can say that you've nailed it. And so I think one of the things that you're mentioning is, when you have a speaker who's really succeeded and done a great job,
whether it's through technical speaking or anything else, they have thought incredibly hard about how to formulate that message, organize that message, and then deliver it beautifully with their own communication style, as Rick noted earlier.
Well, absolutely. And the ones that I thought were most effective are the ones who had really paid attention to the audience and understood what they thought the audience would want to hear. And so they had gone through the audience analysis beforehand, and they weren't just maybe talking in their own bubble world.
Yep, that's a hard thing to do. One of the differences I try to draw out of people is understanding what it means to talk at a person and what it means to talk to a person.
Mm-hmm.
And when you feel disconnected to the speaker, it's because they're talking at you and they're doing more of like a reporter style and delivering a lot of information, talking from their bubble, as you said. But if you're talking to your audience, you're speaking to the people in front of you, you're thinking about them as the audience, what's going on in their heads, you're trying to involve them if at all possible, and speak to them in stories that resonate and empower them to believe what you're sharing. And that's a very common problem that we have to kind of tweak. We need to talk to our audiences, not at them. Nobody likes to be talked at.
Now, Susan, when you went to your conference, these are primarily geologists, engineers?
It was a tough crowd. We had engineers and geologists and geophysicists. So they all come from different points of view.
And they tend to be a little more data-oriented, tech-oriented. They don't necessarily... Did they open up any of them? Any personal stories? Any kind of humor? Or was it just pretty dry half the time?
Well, what made them good are when they had use cases. So you could at least connect. Yeah. And then sometimes they had some humor. One of the things that made it better is if when we had maybe a panel discussion afterwards. So keeping it brief and then letting people ask each other questions really made it much more engaging.
Well, Susan, one of the things you're also talking about is having to sit on these calls through virtual channels for 8 hours, whatever length of time. And that is just incredibly challenging to do no matter what, but also it takes away that personal touch that you can, lean on when you're in person with people. So not only were you listening to science and tech speakers, talk about really complex topics, but also doing it through, a 2D platform. That's hard. It's really hard for speakers to adapt to that kind of an experience. So, throughout this time in the last few months, I've been working with speakers to help them and help them understand how they can maximize that virtual environment since you can't physically be with people. And so one of the pieces we work a lot on is slide design and slide decks, because that becomes 90% or more of your screen. If you're sharing a presentation, you've got pretty much your PowerPoint deck right up there, and maybe your face is about 5% of the screen, and that calls for totally types of presenting and tools. So you need an engaging slide deck, you need vocal intonation that's powerful, you need to be mindful of your pacing and how fast you're talking, you need to pause a little more frequently, you need to be interesting and entertaining. That's true for all public speaking. So. Well,
exactly. And one thing that we found, and this is one thing that a person had mentioned who had been to one of these, and I had been to virtual conferences years ago when we had Second Life, and it was totally an immersive, game-based reality. But no, this was more Zoom or pre-recorded with some chat. But what we found is that absolutely people cannot handle more than 4 15-minute presentations in a row. And so then give a break. I mean, 8 hours straight would have been crazy. So we tried to have like hour and 15 minutes and then time to roam around, do something else, and then come back to another session.
Yeah, it's it's tough because you have to keep the audience and the speaker engaged. And like you said, in the 2D world, that's not an easy thing. There's a lot of distractions on all ends. Even the speakers half the times are distracted because they're looking around, they're trying to figure out who's where. Anybody got their hand up, anybody, sending a message. And usually the best way to do that, at least from a virtual point of view, is to have somebody assisting the speaker. So they don't have to worry about all the nuances of the class as much as just worry about what they're saying and what they have to say if somebody asks a question. Because otherwise, especially if they're not used to it, it's a pain trying to keep up with every little aspect of what's going on. Not fun.
Yeah, the speaker can be very frustrated with what they're trying to have to manage, and you're hitting it exactly right, Rick. You've got to have like a co-host or someone in that call that can allow people coming in late to do that or manage the chat. I actually just ran something this morning, had someone as a co-host, super helpful. But when you're running a large meeting like the one you're talking about, Susan, you want to make sure that the team that's running the whole day is really on during the whole unfolding of every meeting, because your audience can become really frustrated if the panel discussions are not run well, if there's a speaker talking for way too long, or if it's late or too early. There's all kinds of important things to remember for those who are running the virtual meetings as well. Even if you never say a word to the audience, that backdrop of having a well-oiled machine, it's going to give your speakers a good platform to stand on so that they look and feel good and confident with the conference that you're trying to run virtually, which is new to everyone right now. So we're working the kinks out.
It's a gremlin magnet. I mean, they're just like draws gremlins.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So many unexpected things that happen. And Rick, you do a lot of training and all different kinds of educational technology. So how is this time different for you than before?
Not at all. Not at all, because we were doing virtual way before this. So for us, it's like, okay, that's fine. We'll adapt to it. I don't think it's the best way to do it, but we adapted. I'll tell you, on the side, I teach martial arts, and I got invited. I usually get invited physically to show up at this World Tai Chi Day thing, and it's fun. We did it virtually this year, and it was odd. It was odd first trying to teach people how to move or how to do anything remotely. I go, this is weird. I didn't really enjoy it that much. We made it happen. It was a success, but it was like, that was the weirdest thing. And we didn't have that many people. We have much more that were live, so we didn't have that many people virtually. But the ones that were there were actually trying to work out and do their thing, and it was like, okay. But you can't correct them. You can't reach out and touch a hand and say, move it this way, or lift up your arm, or you can't do any of that. So it's hard to teach that way. And I can just imagine people after doing it for a year going, I'm now an expert at this. You're not. You don't even know how to move. But so it's interesting. But yeah, from a technical and educational point of view, we've been doing this for over 20 years. Well, we were starting out early on with some of the tools back when. And so we got used to it. I also used to teach a course for Adobe for about a year. It was a webinar series, how to be interactive when you're virtual, how to be interactive, engaging, how to keep everybody going. And it was interesting. That's the first time I did a series like that, learning their tool, because they were using Connect, which is a pretty cool tool, Adobe Connect. And we had classes where we had, or webinars, we averaged 200 to 250, and we had, I think, 500 as the largest. And the 500, I was going, ooh, that's a lot of people. I hope this thing holds up. And it did.
Okay.
But and people ask, how did you gauge success? And the only way I could gauge success, how many people dropped out during the webinar. And I was shocked. I was personally shocked. I had literally almost none. One maybe every time. We did a year of this. We lost maybe 10 people in a year. I was just, well, I don't think I was that good at this, and I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was just because it was new and people were that interested, or it was Adobe. I'm not sure, but we kept a lot of people engaged in that, and it was a lot of fun. But still, you always wonder, I could have done that so much better if I did this, if I did that. And we kept people engaged. It was a lot of fun. That was the only way we could measure, were we successful?
That's huge. And you're hitting on speaking that a lot of people don't all the way understand, which is, you get up, you give a speech, you think, wow, I really nailed it. That was awesome. And there is something about, we all know how we really do when we come off the stage, and we have that feeling of whether we really hit the mark or we didn't. But, the ultimate test is, what did your audience think? They are the real judge of your presentation and your message, whether it lands or not. So you might be the one doing all the work and figuring out that organizational structure of the speech and coming with, gangs ablazing with your personality and your nonverbals and your story. But if the audience did not feel like it landed, then you didn't do a great job. And that's so true. You got to really, that 3 parts of the triangle, the A for audience is the most shortchanged part of that process. Yeah. And that's largely what I help people do, is learn how to tap into the audience component of persuasion so that they can nail it. And that largely has to do with storytelling and connecting to that audience, because we can throw data points all day long and they are persuasive, but research proves that it is with emotion that we make decisions and purchase and choose to work with people. And you can't skip that heart level of emotion in the story. And you can't skip a story at all. And one example is that I was reviewing this very show, and I was looking at Jacqueline Costner's episode that she just did a few weeks ago. She told a great sticky story, literally sticky and figuratively sticky, about popsicles, that she learned how to, manage her money, and that's how she decided she wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I will remember Jacqueline Costner's story about popsicles and walking the extra block to get one more popsicle.
Yep.
And that landed because.
Oh, did we cut?
Well, I agree with you, and I agree with the importance of emotions. And I mean, I know this is a little bit cynical, but I think that a lot of politicians are trying to engage people and persuade by triggering the limbic system, the reptilian brain, so that we no longer are even able to be rational.
Well, no, I hate to say it, but that's where about most politicians end, right about that brain. But anyway, just saying.
Well, yeah, that's a different playground, and I've done a little bit of assistance with political messaging here and there. I've dabbled in that, helping people write scripts and engage their voting audience. But you're right, that's a different level of, and a different style and type of persuasion, to be honest. But it is interesting to watch, and we are in an election year, a very unique election year. So I'm very curious to see what comes out with regard to, the efforts that normally are in person and large amounts of crowds, and it's just going to be very interesting. The analysis component, like I love, every year I'll analyze the State of the Union, or I'll analyze, an inaugural address and pick it apart and determine, what did the speaker do to really make that message land? How did they do with audience and message and credibility and ethos? And I love to kind of take the puzzle and piece it apart and figure out whether they nailed it or failed it. So,
and it's funny, when you look at the State of the Union, I think one of the things that most makes it memorable are those guests that they have, those special people who've either been injured or have done something incredible. And boy, that's where they the violin strings come and they catch that emotional impact, and it kind of, you can always tell by depending on who that candidate, or not the candidate, but who the president is or who the speaker is, what they're thinking of or what they're seeing is that gives a little bit of an insight into them, unless they're being totally manipulative. It gives you an idea. Well, okay, that's what triggers them, maybe. It's probably not that simple in politics, because everything is tested first, and this is what will trigger somebody, which is a shame. But it's when they're honest and you could tell that it's just a real feeling. That's pretty good.
Absolutely. I actually noticed, the most recent State of the Union was during a very tumultuous time for this president, and I noticed a huge uptick in the people he had brought in to talk about and honor. And I think that was a strategy. He knew that he had a very divisive room in front of him, and everyone loves to celebrate other people, and they were worthy of celebration, absolutely. But it was certainly an interesting tactic that I noticed.
Oh, thought we lost you for a second.
No.
I really like the points that you're making, and I like the examples. I just think it's so important, and I don't know. I think having the ability to honor another person and being willing to do that is another thing that we sometimes overlook. So that keeping that human heart engaged. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, well, I think that, one of my aims at On Point is to hopefully, provide people with the tools they need to really be analysts of messages also, because we can be so fired up by certain messages in the political realm or in other areas of life. And sometimes we need to say, hold on, let's look at what the person was doing from a strategic perspective. And so I try to provide analysis on hotbed topics occasionally to show people what was happening behind the scenes of that person's mindset, and to take as even a stance as possible. I don't take a stance at all in my writing, but I try to educate people about, what are the unique things of an inaugural address that a president has to meet? What are the things they are supposed to be doing with that address? And did they meet them? And if so, how? And, we need to at least recognize the hard work that goes into that. And no matter what side of the fence you're on, there are specific expectations of an inaugural address, of an investor pitch, of any kind of message. There are expectations that the audience has. It's important to know those in advance, build your content, and then meet them.
Now, Cindy, when you first started out, was your education in marketing?
No, my education was in speech communications as an undergrad for a master's degree in rhetoric, which also falls under the umbrella of speech communication. So I have that from the University of Georgia. And yes, I dug deep into applying that triangle and Aristotelian theory, learning different ways to use rhetorical tools like identification and the enthymeme and all kinds of other juicy theoretical terminology that most people don't know about. Yeah. But I've tried to bring some of that theory into the public square through the work I do.
Consubstantiality, that's a good one. You mentioned that.
Right. Yes. So I'm an analyst at heart, and I try to help people understand the toolbox that they can draw from, and then pick up the right tools to make great messages, whether it's spoken or written.
Also, you're a living proof that you can really learn a lot from the Greek philosophers and a lot of our past and history and everything else, not to mention what's happening today. But the Greeks had a lot to offer back in those days. It was really quite interesting.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing, and they still live and breathe through this type of work and their writings today, which is fun for me. I ended up working in the entrepreneurial space quite a lot, helping founders who are pitching investors to kind of take their work out and and seek investment or capital. And a lot of them come from tech universities or national labs. And I reflected one day that I kind of did the same thing. You know, I took something out of academia, rhetoric, and tried to bring it into the public square and show people how to do it. I was actually advised not to use the term rhetoric by a few people because they thought it would be too lofty and hard for people to grasp. But I said, no, I think we can do this. And so it's been a lot of fun to I really rely on rhetoric as the foundation of all my things. And people do get it. And I think that that's been a successful exit, if you will, from the academic walls to helping people in the public sphere and professional ways to learn how to be rhetorically savvy.
That's great. That's really good. And a lot of people don't really know what rhetoric is. I think they think it's something else. I've asked some people, what do you consider rhetoric? And they'll go, it's a debate.
Yeah, it's always put before the word political, political rhetoric or heated rhetoric. And really, it's so much more than that. It's
it is interesting.
Ways of thinking about, what are the modes of persuasion? How do you stand on a stage? I mean, that's what Aristotle asked himself. He would sit there, and I imagine him looking at someone on the stage who gave a speech, and he sat there and he thought to himself, what did that person do in order to persuade the audience? What actually was he doing with his words, ideas, language, and body in order to try to persuade the audience to think, do, or feel something different? And he just unpacked all of that in his book, The Rhetoric, and it's been centuries old learning tool for all of us.
I think it's really amazing because, to me, Aristotle is fascinating because, first of all, he talks about universal psychological conditions of people and the way that they believe each other. But then also when you think about his system, is like system framed mind, where everything is like the categories, and then and then he talks later about just price, and he's just really about equilibrium and balance and understanding a framework, but then classification too. So he's just amazing.
Well, I think, yes, I like systems and frameworks, and that's probably why I was so drawn to how he organizes things. And, like you said, Susan, people need balance, and that's usually I'm working with imbalanced people when they come to me, at least in terms of their messaging. They have too much in one area and not enough in the other, and they don't understand why they're not getting the sales they need or the investment they need or the support that they want. And they don't understand. They're like, well, I know all this stuff and I'm really good at my job. Why isn't anyone raising their hands? And then we have to unpack where that imbalance is and teach them how to strengthen that muscle so that they can walk in and really get the desired outcome that they are looking for.
Do you ever tell people that they need to work on their voice?
Do I tell people yes. Yes, absolutely. Authenticity is first heard through the voice, right? When you are with someone, the first thing that you do, aside from perhaps eye contact, of course, is listen to people. And there are so many important exercises to do to strengthen vocal intonation, vocal variety. I've worked with people that are unknowingly monotone. They don't even know it. And so, how can you use that voice to tell a good story? Well, that's an instrument that you need to prime in order to tell. Great storytellers are doing it with their voice, their body language, the whole package. But, oh yes, voice is critical.
Yeah.
Well, and you would know that. You've heard more voices than most people, I'm sure, just through.
Yeah. Plus, we actually work with a lot of voice talents, and so I'm constantly listening. You'd be surprised how many times I go to a restaurant and I go, "You have a nice voice," to like a waitress or a waiter, and they look at me like, "Really?" I go, "Here's my card," and they probably think, "Who are you? Get away from me!" It says, call me because we're looking for good voices." And so far, no one has called me from a restaurant or anything. I think they don't believe it, or I don't know. Well, they all want to be actors here in California, so that's another issue maybe. But yeah, we love working with good voices, and especially ones that are natural, but yet have good sound to them. And it is sort of interesting, but yeah, I've done that probably about 10 times and nobody has ever called.
Oh, I love that. I think what I love to tell people is if they do have a good voice, I love complimenting them on it, because often they don't know it or they've never heard it in that way before. And I say, wow, you have especially there's, obviously for men, there can be some of those really deep baritone voices that are beautiful and booming. And I say, oh my goodness, we're going to work on your instrument to be sure you're maximizing that as much as possible. I took years and years of training as a singer, not in professional ranks or anything like that, but I had an amazing director in high school who taught our choral groups and madrigals, and I learned so much about enunciation and vocal variety and breath and all these things that really do make a difference when it comes to public speaking. And so definitely we work a lot on voice and especially pacing. That's a big one.
Yeah. Yep. That's great. Well, believe it or not, go ahead, Susan.
Oh, that totally makes sense. And thinking back to my marathon experience with technical papers, it was really interesting to see which ones really captured people. And again, I would say that they incorporated use cases, which, you were talking about that earlier, like they were stories. And then also establishing some kind of connection. I think now in COVID-19, people can relate through kind of mutual suffering. So there's that consubstantiality and getting under the skin. And so those things really make a difference.
They really do. You need to try to aim for being that whole package. And I think that, what we're aiming for here is mastery. We want mastery of the message. And when you have complete mastery of a message, and that has a lot to do with rehearsals till you really, really know it well, you can't give an amazing presentation if you're still thinking about what the next slide is or what the next line is. You have to really embody the message, and that takes some real strategy of rehearsals that are challenging for people to do. People don't like to hear themselves talk, rehearse, but if you want to get better, you gotta do it. It's just, there's no other way to do it. So it's fun to encourage people and to help them find in an area that most people just really dislike with, which is public speaking.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It is for most people. It's like, what is it? What's worse, dentist or public speaking? And it's a draw many times. A lot of people are like, I don't know.
Right.
It is sort of interesting. Well, I remember the first time. I remember in school taking a class on speech, and I kept looking down, and my teacher kept having a sign saying "Look up." I never saw the sign. I was so busy looking down. So he asked me, "What were you doing?" I don't know. I was looking at my notes. Anyway, I couldn't think of what to say, and I had a presentation. I sort of knew it, but I hated the topic. It was boring. It wasn't something I would have. It was here's your topic, talk. It was the moons of Mars, if you can picture it. It was not much is happening on the moons of Mars. It was like torture. But yeah, it was like, and I like science fiction, but this had nothing to do with it. This was just talk about the moons of Mars, their gravity, their atmosphere. Oh, really?
Good stuff.
It is good stuff, but not in front of 50 people who don't want to look at you.
Right.
Like, you're kidding.
Well, I was just talking with, the scars people bring about public speaking experiences from high school and college are really interesting to listen to. And I think everyone has one. I even speaking with a few people the other night, and I have one woman who told me, she said, I wouldn't wear the color red for years. I wouldn't even buy red boots, Cindy. And I said, why? And she said, well, when I was in high school, I gave a speech, and the person in the front row looked up at me at the end and said, you're as red as your shirt. And she just completely, that was all it took. These one-liners for people who just live with this for literally a decade or more.
Yeah.
So what I say to all of you watching is be kind and compliment someone who has just done a public speak of any kind, give them one compliment to encourage them, because it is hard work to do that. And I always remind the speakers, I'm like, you're the one on the stage. Nobody else is brave enough to do it. So you've got something that is on your side. But yeah, I think we can all collectively be better complimenters of all things, but especially hard things like public speaking.
Yeah. It definitely has its challenges, but it's fun. Once you finish, once you do a speech and it works out well, it's a great feeling.
Yep. I've just recorded a video on the science of the I nailed it feeling, which is true. It is a real chemical feeling where you have dopamine and all these actual chemicals racing through your body because of the excitement and adrenaline that you're feeling. So it's a real tangible, there's a reason that you feel that high and that awesome feeling after you nail it. And that's my client.
That's great. Well, Cindy, we'd love to have you back on and talk some more. We're out of time right now, but this is fun, and there's a lot of stuff we could still, tons of stuff we could still touch on, and that would be fun.
That would be fun. There's a lot to this topic, and I think we scratched the surface pretty well today, but we could definitely unpack some more. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate it. Susan?
Oh, yes, thank you, Cindy. I really appreciate it, and thanks for going ahead and expressing and describing some of the theoretical underpinnings, because I think that it's something people need, but they don't often get.
Right. Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, great, and we look forward to seeing you again. And if you're watching the show and you want to get a hold of Cindy, we'll have her LinkedIn information below, and do check her out. And Susan, we'll see you next week. And for all you folks watching, thanks, and leave feedback. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.